Right, on these examples, I'm going to be rationalizing the denominator. And what that means is we want to get rid of any radicals that are in the bottom of a fraction. Okay? Now remember, if I have a fraction under a radical, I can split that into a square root of the top over the square root of the bottom. Alright, now here's the steps I'm going to do. I'm going to take these fractions, multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by the bottom radical. That's going to get me a square root of the a times b on top. Now remember, a radical times itself gives you what was under that radical. That means the square root of 2 times the square root of 2. That gives you the square root of 4. But remember, the square root of 4 is 2. So when I multiply a radical times itself, I get what was under that radical. So officially, square root of a times square root of a is a. Alright, so number 1, I'm going to rationalize the square root of 14 over 3. Now notice, I can't divide under the radical, and that's what's going to make me have to rationalize it, because I'm not allowed to keep a fraction under a radical. So I would break this into a square root of 14 on top over a square root of 3 on the bottom. Now, since neither one of these would simplify, I need to get rid of this radical on the 3 on the bottom. So what we need to do is multiply the top and bottom of this fraction by that square root of 3. So watch what's going to happen. On top, 14 times 3 is under the radical, so that's going to give me 42 under the radical. On the bottom, if you want this step, 3 times 3 gives you 9. But watch what we do. We cannot simplify to 42, because if you break your 42 down, let's see, 21 and 2, and then 21 is what, 3 and 7. There's no pairs of numbers, so the 42 won't break down. So that's going to stay square root of 42 on the top. But guess what? Square root of 9 will break down and give me a 3. Now here it says simplify the radical on top. We said that 42 wouldn't break down. The outside numbers are a 1 and a 3. They don't simplify, so my final answer is a square root of 42 over 3. I cannot divide those numbers because the 3 is not under a radical, and radicals not under radicals, numbers not under radicals can't divide by numbers that are under radicals. Alright, my number 2 is a square root of 13 over 5. So I'm going to make that a square root of 13 on top over my square root of 5. And remember, I couldn't divide these either, so that's what's forcing me to do this next step, which is multiply top and bottom by the bottom radical, which is a square root of 5. And remember, you always do to the top of a fraction what you do to the bottom. Alright, let's see what we get on top. That's going to be 13 times 5 is 65 under that radical. On bottom, 5 times 5 is 25 under that radical. Alright, so let's see, 65, if you break that down, we know that's 13 and 5. Can't break these numbers down no further, so the top one won't break down, so that's going to stay square root of 65. But the bottom, we know the square root of 25 is 5. Now remember, since the 65 is under a radical, it cannot divide by the 5. That's not under a radical. Alright, let's see, number 3. Alright, 3, I got 6 square root of 5 divided by 5 square root of 3. Alright, so I'm not worried about these numbers that are not under a radical. What's bugging us is there's a radical 3 on the bottom of this fraction, so that's what's going to have to be taken care of. So since there's a radical 3 on the bottom, we will multiply top and bottom by a radical 3. Alright, so let's see what happens. The 6 is outside, so it's going to multiply by the 1 technically. So 6 times 1 is 6. Square root of 5 times 3 is 15. On the bottom, this 5 is on the outside. It's going to multiply by that 1, so that's going to give me 5 times 1 is 5. Under the radical is 3 times 3, which is 9. Alright, so let's see what. We can't do nothing with the 15 because that's just a 3 and a 5. So that's going to stay 6 square root of 15 over. Alright, so what's the square root of 9 going to give me? Right, that's going to be what? 5 times 3. watch this. 6 square root of 15 on top over 5 times 3 is 15. So the last step up here said simplify the outside numbers if needed. Well, look, that 6 and 15 will simplify. 6 and 15 both have 3's in them. 6 divided by 3 is 2. Bring down that square root of 15. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So notice, last step, you got to check them outside numbers and see if that will simplify. Alright, number 4 is a square root of 17 over 3. Alright, so once again, I'm going to make that a square root of 17 on top over square root of 3. We're going to multiply the top and the bottom by that square root of 3. Alright, let's see what we get. On top, that's going to be 17 times 3 is 51. On the bottom, 3 times 3 is a square root of 9. Alright, so 51 won't break down because I know the 17 won't break down and the 3 won't break down that are factors of it. But on the bottom, I do have a pair of 3's in that 9. So I'm going to leave the top a square root of 51 over the square root of 9, which is 3. There's no other numbers on the outside to worry about other than a 1, and that's not going to reduce with the 3. So that's my final answer. Alright, 5 is a square root of 11 over 2. So I'm going to make that a square root of 11 on top, square root of 2 on the bottom. So let's see, we want to multiply by the square root of 2 on the bottom and top. So let's see what we get on top. Square root of 11 times square root of 2 is a square root of 22. I know that's not going to break down later because all that's in it is 2's and 11's, and those won't break down. Now if you want to shortcut this, what's the square root of 2 times square root of 2 going to give me? That's going to give me a square root of 4. But what's the square root of 4? The square root of 4 is 2. So if you just realize that a radical times itself eventually gives you that number, radical times itself will give you that number. Now, since the 22 is under a radical and the 2 is not under a radical, they cannot divide. So that's my final answer. Alright, I think I can get my 6 right here. 15 square root of 2 over 2 square root of 3. So remember, we're not worried about the 15 and 2 right now. What we're worried about is there's a square root of 3 on the bottom of that fraction, so we're going to multiply the top and bottom by that square root of 3. So let's see, remember 15 is multiplied by 1 on top, so I got 15 square root of inside times inside, 2 times 3 is 6. On the bottom I got 2 times 1 again, which is 2. Now remember, you want to shortcut this. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is a square root of 9, but the square root of 9 is 3. So y'all, you could have put square root of 9 there, but then you would have had to simplify that radical, then multiply it. Now what I can do is put 15 square root of 6 on the top over 2 times 3 is 6 on the bottom. And let's see, can we reduce these outside numbers? Yes, they both have 3's in them. 15 divided by 3 is 5, so you got 5 square root of 6 on top over 6 divided by 3 on the bottom is 2. So it looks like my final answer would be 5 square root of 6 all over 2. Alright y'all, so this was a short lesson, and that's it on it, so good luck.